Hello there. Welcome to the Culture of Life podcast from Human Life International. I'm Tad Wojcik, the Mission Research Specialist. Again, here with Father Shenan Boquet.
Tad, always good to be with you.
Yes, absolutely, Father. I'm just going to keep that as a catchphrase from now on, since I say it so often. So, Father, we're all probably aware already of this leaked Supreme Court decision in the case Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health from Mississippi, and it's essentially overturning the whole Roe v. Wade decision from 1973, which, if our viewers are unaware, listeners and viewers are unaware, it would be the decision that disabled states from making their own laws about abortion, which is how it had been up to that point. And so this decision would essentially put things back into the hands of the states to make these decisions. So it's not a case of making abortion immediately illegal everywhere, which is one thing that we'll touch on later. But first of all, this was a leaked decision. It was about a month and a half ahead of time from when it was presumed to be coming out. Did anyone expect to find out this way, Father? Did any of us expect this?
No, because this is just unprecedented.
Right.
To have a leaked opinion, allowed to get into the public like that. So we know that the various opinions and writings are interchanged between the justices and shared between the justices, and so that would not have been an uncommon practice for in this case Justice Alito to share his draft with the other justices, and so obviously the justices all have clerks and everyone's looking at. So but I think that the issue here is that's something the court is going to have to deal with, and there's been many speculations about is it legal, not legal, but for us it's in our conversation, it's not really the main focus. I mean, that's something that has to be dealt with. I mean, because it puts the integrity of the court, into question in the sense of, how the confidentiality and how these conversations occur between the justices and, as they reach a decision on any matter. Especially something as much as this landmark case will be, So I think it's, but for us now, that this leaked draft opinion has been out there. And having myself read, the 98-page document, just to really to see how Justice Alito approaches this conversation is encouraging on 2 points of view. Not just from the point of wanting to see human life protected and the decision of whether for a state, through its legislative process, through its elected officials, and through the people, coming together. Obviously, we're not in support of any law that would allow abortion in any state, but to see this opportunity that, as if it stands, to come before us means we now have to really, approach how we're going to address these issues. But I think also from as a U.S. citizen, here in the United States, to see a justice really speak about the Constitution and to speak about, what does the Constitution actually say and how is it interpreted. So it made for a very, insightful read on a number of levels. And having recently completed, a master's in bioethics and having studied constitutional law as part of the coursework, I read it from a very different perspective and just trying to glean from, the writing, what is the justice really addressing? So it's I look forward to the second read, but I think I'm going to wait until I see a final decision and then maybe kind of look at them both. But I know that's not what our podcast is necessarily on constitutional law today.
No, but it is relevant, I think, to some extent
Sure.
from the pro-life activism perspective, because like you said, this is an unprecedented action. It is speculated on the part of one of the clerks or assistants of one of the more liberal justices, essentially as a kind of judicial activism in an illegal manner.
Right.
But At any rate, I think what's important is the response that has come out to kind of as a weather vane of what Americans.
Well, it's kind of interesting, Ted, that you mentioned judicial activism, because that's really a problem that goes back to the original decision,
right?
Where 7 justices, really, came up with this using, different language and kind of, imposed upon this nation, this decision where abortion became legal across the entire country. So it's interesting that the arguments that you see people making today, about quote unquote judicial activism, fail to remember history in 1973, and how again 7 justices. And it's also, as I note in my column, how some have even made note that this is a the all men courtroom and justices, and again, look at what's going on in front of them right now. And so, but as you just said, I mean, I don't want to kind of digress into that conversation again, but I think it's important that people realize that that as we discuss these issues about human life, that we cannot ignore the very mechanisms in which either life is defended and protected at every stage, and that would be through the courts, through our legislative process, through our House of Congress and Senate, in a state level, federal level, courts and district courts, and also now at Supreme Court level. So we cannot ignore that these are places where our conversations must be, and where we have to have advocates, and we do. We have tremendous amount of people, working across this country, at different levels of government, advocating for life, and not only on the issue of abortion, but also on the issue of euthanasia and many other levels. So again, we're here because of the great heroic work of many legislators and many of those working on state level, federal level, bringing this conversation to bear, which we've talked about in our podcast.
And the Supreme Court appointees who are now in sufficient number to have made this decision, which is really good for the country. Right. And it's really, for example, the March for Life has been about this for the whole time.
Well, it does. I mean, it goes to show that where we can exercise our on one person, but each of us has as a privilege of being a U.S. citizen, and given to us by our Constitution, the right to vote, and so we need to exercise that. And this is an example. Not that we voted for the justices, because they're not voted in, but they are appointed. They're nominated by a seated president. And so I think it's important for us not to see that this is also the fruit of people working, to have their vote counted, in the sense of voting for people who are going to advance what we believe and at least enter into the conversation and offer opportunity for these kinds of advancements. And so we know that this conversation has been brewing for years. I speak a little bit about that even under the Reagan presidency, where we've had justices, and so we've kind of been in these moments before where we've seen good opportunity. But this was truly a remarkable moment of time. Even before this leaked opinion came forward, we knew that the court was more receptive to taking on this case and to invest and look at it and to revisit it. It had not been like that in previous years. So when this case came forward and we saw that the court was going to, first of all, receive the case, that in itself, spoke volume. And then to see the oral arguments that we heard back in the early part of this year, and to hear the justices and how they responded, how they reacted, was a good sign of that there was the potential for this case to really bring to bear, what had been imposed upon the states and upon our country, and by those 7 justices, and to see how bad law has come about as a result of that initial bad law, and so here we are. And right now, I think what's important is that until we hear the final decision of the court, as I said in my column recent, we need to keep praying for the justices, praying for everyone involved. We know human nature, and we know that until that final decision is made public, we know that many things can occur. So Right now, we've been hearing from Alito. We've heard from Justice Thomas recently. A few others have spoken. Actually, many of them have spoken very out about the leak itself, which I think is good. They need to speak out on that. But at least from what we're hearing, that we should be receiving the final decision. Remember, this is still an opinion. It's a draft opinion. It could be other renditions of this opinion, that, some redactions and so forth. So until we actually see the final document, but as this document currently is, it tosses, this conversation about, the issue of abortion back to the states. And as you and I have talked about before, from different columns I've written about different states with trigger laws. And so those, like, for example, my state of Louisiana, other states where there already are laws on the book, meaning ready that if Roe were, in this case, to be completely overturned, then those laws in the states would become automatic. And so in some states, we've already seen where their legislators and their governors have signed into law or placed into a process where those pro-life laws would happen immediately. So abortion would become illegal in those states. And then there are other states primed to take on that same conversation in advance. And we also know that there are other states that are advocating for abortion and have always been advocating for abortion and in complete unlimited access to abortion that are not just going to miraculously change. The battle now turns to the states. And I think that's something that, we've been talking about. Many of us in the pro-life movement, especially the leaders within this movement, have been talking about, quote, a post-Roe world. What do we do in those situations? Even within the church, many of our bishops actually, have been talking about this within their own dioceses, even on the USCCB level. They have talked about this, and so what's our approach? How are we going to advance the conversation? What's involved? So here we are, and again, we don't take anything for granted, at face value from what we see in the leaked opinion. Obviously, Justice Alito, for anyone who's read this, has the 98-page document is very clear. It's very thorough, and it addresses all the legal questions. It addresses the constitutionality of Roe and Casey versus Planned Parenthood. It addresses a lot of these issues. And I would encourage people to again, remember, it's a draft opinion, to read it. I think it would be very insightful, to people to understand, how this is being addressed. That it's not just a little one-page document saying, "Hey, we're overturning this decision." It's very well written, and I look forward to studying the document even more. Like I said, I want to wait for the final and then kind of go back and read and see what maybe changes have been made. But there have been many other people well-trained, well-voiced in the language. So, but I think ours now needs to be, what's next? So assuming that this is the decision that will be given, then what is next? What do we do? How do we move forward?
Right, Father. And that's actually in our inaugural episode of this podcast, we were talking about that, preparing for, as you said, a post-Roe world, post-Roe nation, where it's more like guerrilla warfare, fighting state by state.
Right.
And with that seeming to be coming to be the reality soon, barring some really unexpected changes.
Right.
We're seeing already in the aftermath of this leak a lot of protests from the pro-abortion side, a lot of at least threats of violence, if not in some cases. Perhaps I've not been following that, so we don't know, and we don't want to make any claims. But at least there's a lot of vitriol and a lot of. Can we expect more of that then? In the aftermath
it's
of
a
this?
very highly charged issue, filled with many different positions of people across the spectrum of both the social, political, cultural, battleground. It's highly charged in emotion for many people. Having a conversation or a discussion or even a debate on the issue can sometimes raise tremendous amounts of emotion. So it's not to be unexpected, but it is tragic. to hear people actually calling, for, in a sense of not only protest, but really calling people out to be, more, in a sense, I won't use the word violent, but just to be more aggressive in their protests. And I think there is a danger. There is a danger in this because, we live in a country where there is the ability to voice one's concerns, voice one's opinion, and in proper ways. And I think we should always respect that. Listen to people. Let's hear what they have to say, and then let's discuss it. But to see how some people have approached not only this current moment, but over the last decades and so forth, on not only this subject but many others, really doesn't promote, a true respectful debate and conversation, and reaching an understanding of each other and how to approach that subject. So. But yes, to answer your question, Tad, we can't expect it. We've seen this in other countries, of course, where this debate has come to bear, and also on the issues of euthanasia. We've seen the same thing in many other parts of the world, particularly in Europe, where of recent some have come up for the legalization of euthanasia. Some have passed, and we've seen these kinds of events as well. Large protest. We saw one recently with regard to euthanization of children, and so it was a great debate and highly charged. And so yes, I think it's important for us to see that this is going to now move to our states, and we need to just prepare ourselves for this. And I think it's important that people not only prepare for the debate itself, in the conversation and the articulation of what we hold and what we value, but also to be able to how to deal with people and how to deal with opposition. And I think even as a church, we saw on Mother's Day, how some were being called to protest in the various churches. Well, again, the only really the largest institution standing in the way of the pro-abortion agenda is the Catholic Church. She is boisterous in this. She's completely standing her ground in this, and that's not going to change. So I'm not surprised, to see people aim at the Catholic Church. But I think as a church, from our bishops, our lay faithful, to our pastors, even here at HLI, we just need to not take things for granted, and that we need to be prepared. And I think we, as pastors, we ought to really help our people, to educate our people, even in states where, the laws protect life, and those trigger laws are there, and everything is primed in, if we do move in this direction. But we shouldn't take anything for granted. The real challenge I have found with this whole time, Tad, working in the pro-life movement since I was a deacon, and prior to being a deacon, in seminary, is the lack of understanding of the church's teaching. So just because, we now may have a situation where it is now thrown back to the states through its legislative process, we should never assume, that if it comes to a vote, if it were to come to some way of advancement, that we need to educate people on the issue. I'm going to give you an example. I noted this in some of my recent columns, and it does cause me concern, Ted, is that, when you consider that a greater number of those polled would say that in the pro-life, movement, and those who are not for abortion, would say that, they're against abortion in those, after viability in the last trimester. But then you have some that, that are questionable, whether about rape or incest or genetic abnormalities or, the first, trimester. So that tells me, we have a lot of work to do, because abortion is never a viable option. It's never an option at all.
Even in what is often cited as the exception that the Catholic Church has is the case of the life of the mother, but even this is a misunderstanding.
That's right, because it's not an abortion.
Right. And
so I think it's important that's what I mean. So it's a good example, Tad, that we have to really bring forth the beauty of what the church teaches and talk about it. And we have to do it from our pulpits. We have to find a way to creatively, and what I mean by creative is, on a given Sunday, in our Catholic churches, there's a election of readings, and those are the readings that we, that we're called to reflect on, and our pastors, our priests, our bishops preach on the Word of God and apply it to our daily lives. But we have to find a way to integrate this kind of conversation into those moments, and to educate or find other ways to bring to bear. And it can't be just, putting an article in the parish bulletin, a great tool. It cannot just be in the diocesan paper, again, a great tool. But we need to really bring this to the forefront. If we're going to really transform hearts and minds, and really that's what this is all about at the end of the day, we want the law to reflect the truth always. And the truth is that every life is precious from the moment of its beginning at conception till its natural end. And we want our law to protect that given right, that right to life. That is a God-given right. It's not granted to me by my Constitution, even though, I might speak that language. But the reality is that this is a God-given right. It's an inalienable right, that predates the Constitution of our country. And right. So we need to defend it. And so we want that. But we also have to realize that, that in some of our people, who claim to be Christian, claiming to be Catholic, and I try to say that claim word respectfully, but but they don't hold this truth, and some people think that that abortion should be fine at a certain stage, and or that euthanization of someone is fine. No, none of this is acceptable. So this is, to me, is a moment. It's a moment for the Church that if we are given this moment, to bring this argument back to the surface in our states. This is a moment for the Church. This is a moment for the Christian faithful, to come forward and to bring to bear, what we hold to be true and what we hold in beauty, and start talking about it, and to help our people to clear up any confusion and also to clarify. But also, I would say, Ted, we need to hold people accountable, especially those who are in public office. And we've not, with all fairness, we have not done a very good job with that. Many of the people that are advocating for pro-abortion, pro-euthanasia, pro-same-sex union and all this are people who also claim to be, Catholics in good standing. And I know that many of our bishops and many pastors have challenged this in private forums and other forums, and that's great. But we have a public scandal going on. And that needs to be addressed. We cannot ignore and turn a blind eye to those who are advocating for this, and we need to address it. That's how we deal with this, and that's what I mean by every level. So I think this is a moment. If we are given this moment, we should not waste it at all, and we should never take anything for granted. I remember talking with a Bishop Long, who's passed from our world. Who was an ordinary, an active bishop at the time of Roe v. Wade. And I remember him sharing with me how disappointed he was, not only with the decision, but also in speaking about himself. He says, no one ever thought this would come to be. No one ever thought that, that the justices would do this. And so in a way, there wasn't a strong push, to address it, to kind of be proactive. And I remember him sharing with me that he lamented that no one could have anticipated fully what was going to unfold. But yet around them was the whole sexual revolution, the whole movement in our country. There was a lot of, the whole issue of contraception, the whole issue of Humanae Vitae. All this was just brewing. And he said to me, he says, we should have done more. We should have been more vocal. And again, I think that's something that now we have to speak about. If we're given this moment where when it's not ideal, like you said, Ted, this doesn't make abortion illegal in the United States. What it does say is that Roe is no longer the law of the land, and now and so that law now returns, the creation of that law now returns to the state, through its legislative processes, to determine what does the state want to do. And so that just now means that we need to take this moment and not be afraid of it and not be intimidated. That's, I think, the main thing. Do not be intimidated by quote, the other side of the aisle. We need to stand. We stand in truth. We stand with knowing that this is the truth, and let's fight for it. Let's advocate for it. And that means we just need to, but also educating. So that goes kind of back to what we started with, educating, forming people, helping minds to understand. And when people understand, then they will make the right decision.
Right, Father. And it's obviously, as you mentioned, just in this post-Roe we're hoping, expecting post-Roe situation to just be more active as pro-lifers on the state level, in state politics, but also as you're talking about the Catholic Church that most of our listeners will be part of, and as you and I are part of, obviously, to be aware, it's important for us to be aware that this is ultimately a spiritual issue, not a legal issue. And though we have a legal victory, it's actually not it's sort of a compromised position in a sense, because there have been arguments from conservative legal scholars, pro-life legal scholars, that the Constitution can be interpreted as defending life, prenatal life, entirely. Right. In other words, that it couldn't be a state issue because the Constitution of the United States would forbid abortion. Right. And that's really actually had been the tradition of the United States for... And
that's why Alito says there's nothing in the Constitution that grants this right.
Yeah.
So he's made very clear.
Right. So
from the draft opinion.
Right, for the draft opinion. And but in any case, regardless of that and all the legal questions and the coming state battles and everything, I think it's important for us to realize that, as you mentioned, we can be intimidated, we shouldn't be intimidated, but because of the kind of vociferous nature of the opposition, it's ultimately, I think, based in the fact that this is a spiritual reality. It was a scourge that had been unleashed on our nation, as you were talking about that bishop with whom you spoke, that many things had been brewing, and this was kind of abortion was the sort of stamp.
It's a deep wound. It's a wound that has festered over these many decades, and obviously it's as Father Marx, HLI's founder, told John Paul II in 1979, as we were looking at these issues, and it's very, if you call it, in its infancy, literally. I mean, 1979 is just 6 years after the decision of the Court of the United States, but we've seen abortion legalized in many other parts of the world, and so it wasn't like it was something new to the scene. Unfortunately, it was something imposed upon our country, and so Father Marx was sharing with John Paul II and just saying, if we don't intervene and educate people on these issues, they're going to fester into other issues that are now very much common today. So, for example, the issue of euthanasia. Father Marx was very clear, the connection, and it's so true, because if we don't have a respect for life at its very beginning, in its most vulnerable stage, how are we going to protect life throughout the rest of the stages of its life? And that's where we are today. We see our elderly, our handicapped, our poor, so many people who are vulnerable. Now, arbitrarily, people are determining who has value, who doesn't. Whereas the real challenge for us, and I think that's why abortion has created a mindset. But we also got to step back, and this is not, it's something we can address more detailed later as we continue with our podcast, Ted, is, this all begins in a contraceptive mentality. This is the fundamental issue, is, when we have a misunderstanding and a falsification of the good that is human sexuality, that is that which is shared between a husband and wife, and the openness to human life and the transmission of human life, which is what Paul VI was dealing with in Humanae Vitae. And this is what Father Marx shared with John Paul, that when this is allowed to continue, abortion is really, he often called it the stepchild of contraception, the fruit of contraception, which it really is, because if we have a contraceptive mentality, we're against life, against, then naturally when that contraception fails, and it doesn't, and what's being said to me from the scientific community and so forth fails, and life is conceived, they're not for life already, so why would I want now to have this life? So they now want a mechanism. So here we are with abortion. And so abortion has become a contraceptive in itself, because this is, so it's another day for another conversation, but I think this is what I meant earlier, Tad, by the education. We have to really get underneath this and address the fundamental issues that have brought us to this moment as we now address these situations. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's fascinating, Father, because it's not even really hidden from the legal history of Roe v. Wade, that the pretense of the Roe v. Wade decision as well as the Doe versus Bolton
Correct.
decision the same year, same time, was Griswold versus Connecticut,
That's
which
correct.
did the same thing about 10 years prior with respect to contraception, essentially saying no state can legislate against contraception.
Correct. And that's where they created this so-called
right to privacy. Right.
Exactly. So this is why it's important to look at the legal part and realize what's been done. So that's why this is a moment, for us to go back and realize. And so kind of what you started with in the little segment was, it's a spiritual battle. But, the idea here is we would, from our understanding of Christian life and our way that we want to integrate that life into daily living, we want our social, political, cultural life influence to also be, quote, from our view, not imposed, but we want to bring it to bear, So I think it's important to see this, it's not one over the other, but if we're living out our faith fully, and we are trying to integrate that into daily life, no matter what position I hold in life, then yes, we would like to see our laws reflect that. For example, I think that we need to be looking at this conversation, across the spectrum of life. So to me, as we speak about these issues, we always try to integrate them. So abortion, euthanasia, try to look at how the assault on life, really is something we need to start talking more and more about in our parish communities, in our local churches,
and in an integrated way. Because if it's pretty common, you can be a practicing Catholic and be opposed to abortion, but maybe privately contracepting or not opposed to it.
Correct. Or you might not be opposed to, quote, euthanization.
Right.
So you can see where we're having some issues, and that and I read. I see what people write. I hear how people address some of these issues. So for myself, that is why what I love about HLI is we address all of those issues. We look at the beautiful ethic of life. Life is a good. Life is precious, and it must be protected. There is no arbitrary way of looking at the dignity of human life, at innocent human life. It's very, very important as we have this conversation. So that's why this is going to be a difficult journey. If this holds as it is presented to us in this draft opinion, we know that it's going to be a difficulty. We know it's going to be pretty furious in some of the states, and we just need to really start anticipating. And I'm very happy, to see, again, many things already laid forward for this. They've been anticipating it. And I think it's an exciting moment, and I think there's kind of a feeling, that we're moving towards something really good. And I feel the same way. I'm waiting for that final decision, because then we know what we have in front of us. Until that moment, there's just this concern. But that's a natural thing until we know something final. So, but anticipating that this is the final, I see it as a moment of grace, because it now just brings us all to the table. We all have to come forward and contribute to the good. And in a way, it's like being given a second chance. Wouldn't it be wonderful one day to have all 50 states? Wouldn't it be great to see, our nation through its legislative process, its federal level, say, no, abortion is illegal across the board. Now, we're not going to be there tomorrow. Can it happen? Yes, it can. Again, it's about transforming hearts and minds. I really think Mother Teresa and John Paul, our great two saints, really captured this so beautifully. Mother talked about the arbitrariness of the violence of abortion. And what she looked at was very simple, very practical, that if I can arbitrarily say A has no value, then I can just as easily say to B that you have no value. So a child in the womb can be determined arbitrarily by someone, mother, father, not of value. So why can't that same person also determine other people to not be of value? Very simple, but if we as a people see life completely from its very beginning, and we all know, I don't care what the scientific community is trying to do and guising itself in the pro-abortion stance and industry, we all know that life begins at the moment of conception. not an implantation like some are trying to do, which again allows them to have an opportunity for abortion. The idea is we know that life begins at the moment of conception. So that life is a unique life. And if we protect this innocent life, then we base all of our laws that life is to be protected, then we can see it move forward. And so we can deal with the issue instead of promoting euthanasia, as John Paul would say. No, what we would be promoting is how do you and I, Tad, stand with our brother and sister who is suffering and in need? How can we be of help to them? How can we accompany them? How can we, and for us as Christians, to see the value of redemptive suffering. We're not talking about any of this enough. And so, but that would move a country in a very different direction. And we have to be very honest. Our culture are very sad. Many of our states, many of our major cities are filled with violence. And I think we just
not
need
even just the legal violence of abortion, but just
murders,
all kinds of crimes.
Yeah,
and which abortion ought to be a crime, but
exactly. But I mean, again, I think it goes back that we've lost a sense of respect for life, and we've devalued life. Almost across the spectrum and I think that's the real challenge before us. And that's why I see this as a moment to back up that banner again, and just speak about life itself is an inalienable good. It's precious. It's beautiful. It's wonder, and every life has something to offer and to give, and is beautiful. And we need to value this, and fight for it, and not be fall into this trap that has been laid by the evil one. Go back to the spiritual battle that has allowed us to become, in a sense, cloudy in our judgment and understanding of human life, of human sexuality, of marriage. So this to me, my first reaction when I heard about the draft opinion and then seeing it and then reading it, I really walked away with a sense of a feeling of hope that there's an opportunity that we may be given, to heal and to seek forgiveness and to take a different path if we have the courage. And I think that's the real challenge for our society. I looked back at Hungary, back in 2012, that changed its constitution, and again, nothing's perfect. There's still lots of things to keep working on, but it moved in a pro-life direction, a very strong pro-life direction. And that means now the country itself, is moving in a new direction. It's having its ups and its downs, but that's where we're going to be. If we can really step from this and see this as an opportunity, then we as a country can move forward and be united. We're divided. I mean, so divided.
So divided. And actually, you mentioned Hungary. There's a similar situation in Poland a few years ago.
That's correct.
But that brings up a nice question for us then about the implications, because obviously the U.S. is still, at least for now, the strongest superpower in the world. Right. And this kind of a decision has implications not just for all the 50 states, but all the states around the world. And as we see abortion advancing, as we've discussed in other podcast episodes, in Colombia, other countries in Latin America, it's been a constant push in parts of Africa, and other things that HLI keeps its quite involved in, because that's our goal is pro-life advocacy around the world. We have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for the culture of life around the world as well? Because I think, as you said, it's a very hopeful situation, but also one that is also a challenge.
Right.
It's not like a done and said and done thing.
Exactly. No, it's a good point, Ted. I mean, and I think I think of the scripture. Fear is useless. What is needed is love. And I think that that the daunting challenge of what lies before us is it in itself can seem very overwhelming. I mean, even before this leaked opinion, what did we find? We found people who have been advocating for life, from on every level for many decades. And it seems every time we kind of make 1 foot forward, you get knocked back 3 feet, and so it can be discouraging. But we've persevered, And here we are at a pivotal moment, a potential moment of time where we can help not only, again, heal, but how do we move forward? And not just among the 50 states, but how do we as a country impact the rest of the world? And we know through the Hyde Amendment, which we've talked about before, which has been sadly challenged by those within the pro-abortion industry, and trying to find ways around it or just completely negate it. Sadly, we've seen where the Mexico City policy kind of goes, and as people often say in the pro-life movement in other countries, depending on which way your flag flies, the policy changes. So we need to move it from a policy, into where it is a law that says no, that funding cannot be used, and we're as a country. So we know that sadly, dependent on the president and those in the seats of power in Congress, we know that USAID also makes a huge impact in this conversation. We also know how funding goes to the United Nations, also is very impactful. A lot of the United Nations funding comes from the United States of America. So there is a way that you're absolutely right, where this conversation is not just bound to our own country, that we can change our policies, our state policies, the way that we approach other nations, the way that we fund. I mean, Pope John Paul II, Pope Francis currently, Pope Benedict before him, 16th before him, really were very strongly worded, and Pope Francis still strongly worded, about how aid is given to nations of need with all these conditions. So the United States is not, does not have a very, and many people's other countries do not look at us with great love and admiration, because they know that many of their problems are being caused by us, in the sense of how we approach aid, how we approach care,
right?
And that needs to change. So I think that's kind of getting to a little bit of what you're saying. I see this, that it's going to take great courage to get into all of that, and to literally to remove all that language and to change it, and to say that that this is what this nation believes, and we're not going to do anything upon any other nation. To the contrary, that we uphold life, we uphold the dignity of life. Every life is precious, and we're going to defend that belief. And so all of our foreign policy now changes. The way that we approach U.S. aid changes. The way that we approach charity, in a sense of our assistance to other nations, And again, HLI is in a position where we've seen the consequence of our state policies. We see it firsthand through our affiliations and our partnerships and our relationships in the developing world, particularly. We've seen it. We know it. And I can tell you, under the situation in Puerto Rico, for example, which is again part of the United States, but that when President Trump, took the Mexico City policy and moved it toward the position of life, as it should. Well, we saw examples where two abortion provider facilities in Puerto Rico, in this community, because one was getting aid from the United States, closed. The other one was privately being funded, and it remained open for a while. But it shows you what policies do, And so this is an opportunity. So I'm with you, Tad. I that's how I look at the larger picture.
Right.
But again, it's a slow inroad. So right now, the first step is to have the majority opinion that we have seen leaked to us under that draft, to find the final copy or final decision made, and outside of any little nuance, that it stands as we have seen it. If that's the case, then we know exactly what's going to happen that same day. That same day. In a great many of the states, abortion is now illegal. But we also know, Tad, that and I again respectfully use the word enemy, all right, that the enemy of the pro-abortion agenda, that's the enemy, the agenda, and sadly those who promote it, and advocate for it. They're not just going to roll over, and so we know that we've seen the tactics, we've seen how it works. We now need to be proactive. We need to educate our people. We need to, especially within the Catholic Church, within our Christian communities, we need to educate, form people, also support people who are working in this great cause. Another thing we need to do, Tad, which we've talked about before, and I'm going to go to Texas now. We've talked about this with the Texas heartbeat law. all right, which is still legal and holding, and lives are being saved because of it. But what did Texas do that I've not seen any other state do yet, and even those that are promoting a similar heartbeat law? $100 million, which is still a little, it's not a drop in the bucket, I won't say that, but it's saying that it's an advocacy account. It's to help those who are advocating for families, for mothers, situations that are difficult. In other words, they put the money where the mouth is. $100 million are out there. That's the next step we have to be prepared for, because what allowed the enemy to move this conversation was something which was a great lie. And that was, all we care about, quote unquote, is the baby. That's untrue. We've always, the church has always been an advocate, for both mother and child and the family. And this is another time for us to put our money where our mouth is. And we need to open centers. I don't like crisis. I like, pregnancy care. I like the fact that but we need to be there. We need to be present. We need to be available, because those situations that have led many of our sisters to consider an abortion are not miraculously going to go away because Roe is overturned. Their situations, their hardships, their struggles are still there. And we need to be there. And that's where we have to step up our response. And that's what the U.S. bishops have done over the last 2 years through some of their pro-life advocacy programs, which I think is fantastic. Walking with mothers. We need to be there. And then once we remove those obstacles, those difficulties, in the sense of being present and being assistance, then people will see there is no reason for abortion. There's no reason to even consider that as an option. It should never be an option. But if we can remove it.
If we can remove the excuses, you mean,
exactly.
Because that's what
exactly.
how this got here in the first place.
Exactly.
And it's interesting, Father, because like I think what you're kind of driving at here is that the culture of death doesn't die with legal decisions.
No.
Legal decision, right? Because it's spiritual, and there's a spiritual hold on this country that has been ingrained now for several decades. But the legal decisions are important in the culture of life.
Oh, absolutely.
It's quite possible that this is watershed moment, a turning point in the whole
tens of thousands of lives. Mm-hmm. To the point of and just think, since Roe v. Wade, at a minimum number that I've seen is 63 million deaths.
Yeah.
And that number may not be, maybe much higher, because we don't know the ones that have not been reported. And we also know that the chemical abortions are going to, through what we're seeing with the quote unquote abortion pills and so forth. This whole thing is going to intensify, because as we just said, it's not going to roll over. This agenda is just not going to go away. So we have to be primed. We have to be ready. We have to be standing, to address these issues. And I just, today I was working, with one of our mission reports and in one of our appeal letters, and talking about stories in the mission field, and so of women who find themselves in very difficult situations. And the answer is not abortion. The answer is you and me. That's the answer. And that has to be the answer here. And that's why I keep coming back, many times even in my writing, back to that Texas heartbeat law and back to what Texas did, because I have not seen any other state, put the heartbeat law aside, that's saving lives
by itself.
But just the bill, that advocacy that they've passed, in itself puts tremendous amount of financial resources available to pregnancy care centers, to centers that are helping families. I'm so grateful for that. I hope it has a wonderful effect on. I wish my own state would do it. From Louisiana, maybe they are thinking, I don't know, I need to call someone and actually I wanted to do that recently and I haven't done it, but I need to do it because I think it's something that says as a church. I was fortunate to be able to be home back in Louisiana for Mother's Day for a very brief visit, and we have a tradition in my diocese where they make corsages, for mamas, and the money goes to help the Pregnancy Care Center. And I saw this year, from hearing from many people, that they received more donations this year than they ever have seen. And I think, again, it's because of this potential change in our law about abortion. from a federal point. So if Roe's overturned, people see this, and that speaks volume, which means we got to pick up that message as a church, as a people. So again, I know, Tab, we're going to talk more and more about this, especially as this unfolds. I'm writing another column right now on the same issue, kind of post-Roe world, just giving people things to think about, myself included. How does this change HLI's approach in the United States? How does it affect, what you brought up earlier? How does HLI, advocate for foreign policy to promote life? So in other words, so I don't think this question has come up yet. How does this decision of the court, potential decision, right now it's an opinion, this decision of the court, if it holds, how does that affect now federal policy?
And we can see that there'll just be, the fighting will maybe increase to a fever pitch, because this is now seen as something to which Americans had been entitled for many decades, with this idea of a right to abortion. And so that's the language that the counter assault will be made in, that there's all taking away of rights. Right.
Which goes back to Father Marx, in a sense, what I mentioned earlier about a mentality.
Yeah.
So when we think about these many decades, it really has become a mentality, and as you said, so-called right. And so this is going to be hard, as we know. A mentality is very hard to undo. So we can change the law, we can create new law, we can create good law, and that will have a tremendous impact, absolutely, because that also affects mentality. Just like this bad law created a mentality, good law can create a good mentality and promote something good. So yeah, absolutely, but for the moment, we got to literally unravel the damage and change the mindset and reorient people in a different direction. And I know for myself and our team here at HLI, we will not stop picking up that banner about the contraceptive issue, because it is the fundamental issue here. And I would like to see more pro-life advocates pick this up. And many have. I like to see more do it, because it is the real issue here. And so if we don't address it, then the other issue, which is abortion, is going to continue to be part of a conversation.
And it's important for Christians to have unity on these issues, and especially contraception, and really Catholics as well, because think of what witness has suffered tremendously from a lack of, the Church's teaching has always been very clear, very potent, but individual Catholics as private individuals, essentially being disobedient and sinning, at least in promotion or acceptance of
part of that.
Contraception.
We'll be able to pick this up again and talk about it in greater detail. But as we've said before, a lot of times it's false understanding, poor formation, lack of education on the issue, and also with that a lack of support. And in the sense of also, it's interesting, and maybe this is for myself, but I use priests and religious sisters, and I think I shared this story one time before, and I think but it's important to see that we can live the fullness of what God has revealed to us, and especially in the teachings of our Lord Jesus Christ and through His church. We can live this, and so when people think that we can't live pure, chaste lives, that's not. It's an untruth. We can, and when we and just because some people in positions of authority and sadly within the church have given bad example, that doesn't mean everyone is giving bad example. We have great men and women, great religious men and women, wonderful priests, great consecrated virgins and married couples living chaste, pure lives, virtuous lives. And every day we can live the gospel. We can live the heart of it if we are willing to be courageous. And so we need to really, that's what I mean by the teaching, getting back to that. So a couple, who may think they can't, that contraception is the only answer. No, it's not. And to a person who may not be married, who thinks that this is the culture, that, sexual promiscuity and so forth is what everybody's doing, that I can't be chaste. That's not true. So this is why I'm saying it's a total formation, what John Paul called a re-evangelization. And of course, before him, that term was used as well many times. So that's why I'm seeing this. I'm hopeful, Tad. I'm I don't rest all my hope on the situation. I rest my hope completely in Jesus Christ and His church. But these are moments. These are good moments. And if we're given this chance, if we are truly given this, I don't want to waste any more time.
Yeah, it's really God giving a second chance, as you said earlier, to see whether we'll take Him up and really try to fight back once and for all on these issues. Because, like we said, building the culture of life is really what it's all about, and laws are important to that. They're not really distinct, but laws aren't everything. We need a real culture of life, of promoting the dignity and sanctity of every human person.
Amen.
Yeah. So thank you, Father, for talking about this with me today. And we'll probably pick this up again, I assume,
no doubt,
another episode, and definitely in your columns coming forth. So with that in mind, thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned, because this is heating up, and it's a conversation that HLI is definitely going to be paying attention to and really taking up. So with that in mind, thank you all for watching, viewing, listening. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe, and leave a comment if you'd like, and turn on notifications. If you're listening on Amazon, Spotify, or any of the other podcast platforms, please keep following us and recommend us to everyone, all your friends. It's a great way to live the culture of life. And with that it's said, then, Father, we'll sign off and just ask everyone to keep praying, fasting, and living the culture of life. God bless.